What if I told you that the most dangerous criminals in American history, men who outsmarted judges and entire police forces, were ultimately defeated by a sneeze, a birthday cake, and one guy who couldn't stop bragging at bars for 6 straight years? We found 111 of the dumbest prison escape fails in U.S. history, and number 85 will make you question everything. Smash that subscribe button right now, because we haven't even gotten to the guy who escaped maximum security and then asked the bus driver for a free ride. Let's go. 1. Nobody in Indiana thought a wooden gun could take down an entire jail, but John Dillinger proved every single one of them spectacularly wrong. He carved a fake pistol from a plain shelf board, darkened it with shoe polish, and walked straight up to the guards holding real loaded machine guns. Those guards looked at a painted piece of wood and surrendered immediately, handing Dillinger the keys to his own freedom without a single shot fired. 2. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers at Alcatraz pulled off one of the greatest cons in prison history. And the funniest part is the guards helped them every single night without knowing it. These guys collected real human hair from the barbershop floor, mixed it with toilet paper and soap, and sculpted dummy heads so convincing they fooled everyone. Every night, guards physically poked those heads, got exactly what they expected, and walked away completely satisfied for months straight. 3. Ted Bundy genuinely believed he was the smartest man in any room he walked into, and his 1977 Aspen courthouse escape proved exactly how wrong that was. He jumped from a second-floor window thinking freedom was waiting below. Instead, he wandered the Colorado mountains completely lost for 6 full days, breaking into empty cabins just to find something to eat. After all that surviving, all that wilderness drama, a cop spotted him weaving a stolen car all over the highway like a teenager who just learned to drive. 4. Pulling off a clean prison escape and then getting outsmarted by your own mouth is a special kind of failure. Richard Lee McNair escaped a federal prison in Louisiana and was stopped by a police officer almost immediately after. He stood on the side of the road and talked that officer into letting him go completely free while the dashcam recorded every single second. The officer drove away satisfied. Then the footage went viral worldwide, and the same cop watched himself get fooled on the evening news. 5. Stealing a guard uniform to walk out of a maximum security Texas prison in 2000 was already one of the boldest moves in escape history. The Texas 7 did exactly that. But one inmate took the boldness to a completely different level by grabbing the uniform of a female correctional officer and just walking straight out wearing it like nothing unusual was happening. Nobody stopped him. Nobody asked a single question. He strolled through the gate, nodded at staff, and disappeared into the Texas afternoon without breaking his stride. Once. 6. Living free after 3 separate prison escapes should have been easy for Alfred Hines, especially since British authorities kept losing him. The problem was Hines himself. Every single time he got out, something in his brain forced him to sit down and write detailed bragging letters to newspapers, explaining exactly how clever he was and exactly how he had done it. Authorities read every letter with great interest. Every letter led them straight back to him. 3 escapes, 3 recaptures, all self-inflicted because the man could not stop showing off. 7. Escaping a Kentucky jail in a stolen prison garbage truck already sounds like the plot of a comedy movie nobody asked for. These 2 men drove that truck exactly 2 miles down the road and then made a decision that has confused criminologists ever since. They parked, walked calmly into a diner, sat down at a table, and ordered breakfast like 2 completely normal people having a completely normal morning. Officers arrived and arrested both of them before the food even reached the table. The whole plan was eggs. 8. Surviving a prison escape requires one golden rule above everything else, which is do not announce it to the world in real time. A Florida man clearly never received that memo. He escaped, pulled out his phone, opened Facebook, and started live streaming himself wearing his full bright orange prison jumpsuit for anyone on the internet to watch. His location was traced almost instantly, authorities were called, and he was arrested within 22 minutes of going live. He did not even have time to hit 100 viewers before the handcuffs returned. 9. Helicopters are not exactly standard prison escape equipment, but Pascal Payet made them his entire personality. He escaped a French prison by helicopter in 2001, and the world was stunned. Then he escaped again by helicopter in 2007, and the world was somehow even more stunned. But investigators traced his second escape directly back to the exact same helicopter rental company he had used the first time around without any hesitation. He discovered the most creative escape method in modern history and then walked back to the exact same place to rent it again. 10. Bernie Coy orchestrated the 1946 Battle of Alcatraz like a man who had planned every single detail perfectly, and he almost pulled it off. He seized the entire cell house, took guards hostage, and had the operation running exactly as intended. Then everything collapsed because of one key. A single key needed to unlock the yard gate had been hidden in the wrong location, and nobody could find it anywhere. The whole group stood trapped inside the cell house while chaos exploded around them, stopped completely by one misplaced piece of metal. 11. Charles Pretty Boy Floyd spent years successfully dodging every law enforcement agency in America, which was genuinely impressive for a man with his face on wanted posters nationwide. His entire operation fell apart in a cornfield in East Liverpool, Ohio in 1934 because of one farmer and one post office wall. A local farmer recognized Floyd from a wanted poster he had seen during a routine mail run and called the county sheriff immediately. Floyd had been buying supplies from that same farmer for weeks without ever changing his routine or wearing any disguise whatsoever. 12. Planning the largest prison break in British history and then forgetting to arrange a single getaway car is the kind of oversight that keeps criminologists laughing decades later. In the 1984 Maze prison escape in Northern Ireland, 38 prisoners successfully broke out of one of the most heavily guarded facilities in Europe. Then 19 of them were recaptured within 1 hour because nobody had arranged civilian clothes, no vehicles were waiting outside, and not a single contact on the outside had been notified. 38 men out, 19 back inside before the hour was done. 13. Willie Sutton was clever enough to escape Holmesburg Prison in Pennsylvania in 1947 by impersonating a prison guard, which showed genuine criminal creativity and decent nerve. What showed absolutely zero creativity or nerve was his choice of which guard to impersonate. Sutton picked a guard who was actively on duty that exact same day, working the same shift, walking the same corridors. The real guard spotted his own impersonator heading toward the exit, walked straight over, and the whole escape collapsed right there at the door before Sutton ever got close to freedom. 14. Hiding successfully in an RV park for weeks after one of the most publicized prison breaks in Texas history sounds like a decent long-term strategy. The Texas 7 almost made it work. Their entire carefully constructed disappearing act collapsed because of a single phone call from a Colorado couple sitting on their couch, watching America's Most Wanted on television. The couple recognized one of the fugitives on screen, looked out their window, saw the same man at the RV park next door, and called the tip line. Television ended what maximum security could not. 15. Digging an escape tunnel for months inside Alcatraz alongside your partners takes serious commitment, patience, and coordination. Alan West had all three qualities in abundance right up until the one night that actually mattered. On the evening of the 1962 escape, West discovered his vent grate was completely stuck because he had accidentally reinforced the surrounding concrete too solidly during the digging process. His partners slipped through their openings and disappeared into the dark bay water while West stayed behind, still pushing against an immovable grate, left alone with the sounds of Alcatraz settling around him. 16. Breaking out of an Atlanta federal prison through a boiler room roof in 1971 required serious planning and genuine physical effort from everyone involved. One inmate, however, decided the most important thing to do once he reached the roof was not escape quickly, but stop and carve his initials into a vent pipe for reasons that remain unclear to this day. Investigators found those initials the very next morning and used them to identify him within hours. He successfully broke out of a federal prison and then personally signed his name to the crime scene. 17. Eric Freund spent 48 days evading hundreds of law enforcement officers across the Pennsylvania wilderness in 2014, which is genuinely one of the longest successful evasions in modern American fugitive history. Helicopters searched, dogs searched, entire tactical units swept through those woods repeatedly. Nobody found him. The place where he was finally captured after all that dramatic wilderness survival was an abandoned airplane hangar sitting in plain sight that searchers had simply never once bothered to check during the entire 48-day operation. The most obvious hiding spot in the search zone, and nobody looked inside. 18. John Dillinger. Escaping Crown Point Jail was already a national embarrassment for Indiana law enforcement. What made everything dramatically worse was the vehicle he chose for his getaway. Dillinger drove away in the Crown Point Sheriff's own personal Ford, which immediately crossed state lines and turned a local jailbreak into a federal case overnight. The full FBI was brought in. The entire manhunt escalated to a national crisis, and J. Edgar Hoover made Dillinger his personal priority. One borrowed sheriff's car transformed a simple escape into the most wanted chase in American history at that moment. 19. Swapping identities with inmates scheduled for legitimate release sounds like a foolproof plan, and in Georgia in 2013 it almost was completely foolproof. Two convicted killers pulled it off smoothly, walked through processing, collected their belongings, and headed for the exit with everything working perfectly. Then one jailer noticed something small. The release paperwork had been initialed by the wrong inmate, a tiny clerical inconsistency that should have meant nothing. That jailer looked closer, asked one question, and the whole identity swap unraveled completely before either man reached the outside door. One wrong initial ended everything. 20. Theodore Cole and Ralph Rowe picked what looked like a perfect escape window at Alcatraz in December 1937, choosing a thick bay fog that would hide their movements completely from the guard towers above. They sawed through iron bars, reached the water, and disappeared into the fog exactly as planned. What they had not planned for was the water temperature sitting at 54 degrees, and the bay current running faster than any man could swim against. Neither was ever seen again. They escaped Alcatraz successfully, and the Pacific Ocean immediately handled the rest of the situation. 21. Richard Matt spent 23 days as the most hunted man in New York after his elaborate and carefully planned Dannemora escape in 2015. Helicopters flew overhead, dogs tracked through forests, hundreds of officers swept every road and tree line in the region. After all that dramatic manhunt energy, Matt was not caught by any of it. A Border Patrol agent spotted him lying drunk in an open field near a road, completely exposed, making no effort to hide himself whatsoever. 23 days of one of America's biggest manhunts ended with a man napping in grass. 22. Casey White and jail administrator Vicky White pulled off one of the most talked about prison escapes of 2020, partly because a corrections officer helping an inmate escape is already a stunning story on its own. Their plan was solid, their execution was careful, their downfall was a car wash. A single surveillance camera mounted at an ordinary car wash had captured their getaway vehicle on the morning of the escape without either of them knowing. Investigators found that footage, identified the vehicle, and tracked the pair down within 11 days. A routine car wash camera ended their entire run. 23. Ted Bundy, making his second escape from Glenwood Springs Jail in 1978, required cutting through a ceiling light fixture in his cell, which sounds like it should have been impossible. It almost was impossible, except for one small scheduling failure that nobody has ever been able to fully explain. A maintenance crew had been scheduled to weld that exact fixture permanently shut for weeks before Bundy ever touched it. The work order existed. The crew existed. Nobody ever came to do the job. Bundy found the gap, widened it slowly, and slipped through a hole that should never have been there. 24. Machine Gun Kelly was one of the most feared names in Depression-era America, a man whose reputation for violence kept entire communities terrified and law enforcement constantly scrambling. His actual capture in Memphis in 1934 had nothing to do with clever detective work or dramatic confrontation. Kelly had been hiding with a friend who quietly contacted the FBI after Kelly stayed too long, ate too much food, and simply wore out his welcome completely. The friend made one phone call. Agents arrived. Kelly reportedly said, "Do not shoot G-men," and surrendered without any resistance whatsoever. 25. Martin Garul made history in 2000 by becoming the very first person to ever successfully escape from Texas death row, which is genuinely one of the most secure and carefully monitored facilities in the entire American prison system. The escape itself was real. The freedom was not. Gurul was found floating face down in a creek, located just outside the prison perimeter the very next morning, having drowned during the water crossing in the dark. He broke out of a place nobody had ever broken out of before and did not survive long enough to enjoy a single moment of it. 26. Impersonating a defense attorney to walk into a Pennsylvania jail and walk back out as a free man in 1903 was genuinely one of the more creative escape methods of that entire era. Frank Biddle pulled it off smoothly, got through the doors, made his way inside, and had everything moving perfectly. Then the real attorney he was impersonating showed up for his actual legitimate appointment exactly 10 minutes later. Two men claiming to be the same lawyer stood in the same building simultaneously, and the entire situation collapsed into immediate confusion that unraveled Biddle's escape before he reached the street. 27. Robert Shepard escaped an Alabama County jail in 2003 by faking a medical emergency convincingly enough to get himself transferred to a hospital, which showed real creative thinking under pressure. He walked out of the emergency room without anyone stopping him, got outside, breathed free air, and had the whole world available to him. His next decision remains one of the most baffling in recorded escape history. He walked 2 miles to a Waffle House, ordered food, sat down at a table, and fell completely asleep before the plate arrived. Officers found him there snoring peacefully and arrested him without incident. 28. Belle Gunness was already one of America's most prolific and terrifying serial killers before she allegedly pulled off the most audacious disappearing act of the entire early 20th century. In 1912, investigators arrived at her Indiana farm to find the building burned and a headless female body inside that she claimed was her own death. Authorities could never confirm the body was actually hers. No positive identification was ever made. Belle Gunness simply vanished from the historical record entirely, making her one of the longest unresolved fugitive cases in American criminal history, with zero confirmed ending to her story. 29. David Breakspear walked out of a Tennessee prison facility in 1992, dressed convincingly as a cleaning contractor, moving calmly through corridors and past staff members without raising a single alarm. The disguise worked perfectly. His timing, however, was catastrophically bad, in a way that felt almost personally designed to ruin him. The actual cleaning company whose identity he had borrowed had canceled their prison contract that same morning before Breakspear ever put the uniform on. Staff were already expecting no cleaning crew that day at all. He walked in as someone nobody was supposed to see and every single person noticed. 30. Finding out your prison escape was undone by a birthday cake is not something most criminals ever expect to deal with. In 1988, a Michigan inmate received wire cutters smuggled inside a decorated birthday cake, used them successfully, and got out of the facility without immediate detection. Investigators traced him within 24 hours not through surveillance footage or informants, but through the cake itself. The bakery that made it was identified, the purchase record was pulled, and the sender was found through a completely ordinary transaction receipt. One birthday cake order brought down the entire operation from start to finish. 31. Frank Sprenz pulled off a genuinely clean escape from Leavenworth in 1958 by hiding inside a laundry cart and sliding right out of one of America's most famous federal prisons without a single alarm being triggered. He got out clean, stayed free, and had every opportunity to disappear completely into American anonymity. Then he checked into a motel 3 days later, using his own real full name, and paid for the room with a personal check drawn directly on his own personal bank account. Investigators found him before the check even cleared. 3 days of freedom, ended by basic banking. 32. Gerald Chapman holds the historic distinction of being the first man ever publicly named Public Enemy #1 in America, which meant every law enforcement agency in the country was actively hunting him at all times. Chapman escaped a federal prison using a rope ladder, which was bold and athletic and genuinely impressive. What was not impressive was what he did before the escape even happened. He mailed a letter to a newspaper announcing the escape in advance. Authorities intercepted and read that letter before he ever touched the rope. He announced his own escape to the people hunting him. 33. Two juveniles escaping a Pennsylvania juvenile facility in 2016 by climbing a fence sounds straightforward enough, the kind of impulsive teenage decision that happens at low-security facilities across the country every year. What happened on the other side of that fence, however, elevated this particular escape into something genuinely special. They climbed over, dropped down, and landed directly in the private backyard of the county sheriff, whose jurisdiction included that exact facility. The sheriff's personal home was situated immediately next to the property line. They escaped juvenile detention and landed in the backyard of the one person they least wanted to meet. 34. James Earl Ray, assassinating Martin Luther King Jr., guaranteed that every law enforcement resource in America would be permanently focused on finding him for the rest of his life. Ray escaped Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary in Tennessee in 1998 alongside 6 other inmates by climbing a makeshift ladder over the wall, which required real physical coordination and planning from the entire group. Then they entered the surrounding woods and got completely turned around with no sense of direction whatsoever. 54 hours later, and only 8 miles from the prison, a search team found them exhausted and hopelessly disoriented in the Tennessee wilderness. 35. New Mexico Territorial Prison inmates in 1910 committed months of backbreaking underground labor to dig an escape tunnel, moving dirt quietly and carefully while avoiding detection from guards walking directly above their heads every single day. They calculated their exit point, measured their distances, and dug with genuine discipline toward what they believed was open ground beyond the prison walls. When they finally broke through the surface after all that effort, they emerged directly underneath the prison's own water tower, a structure that was staffed and monitored continuously around the clock. Months of digging delivered them straight back into the prison's own footprint. 36. Bedsheet ropes have been a prison escape staple since practically the invention of prisons themselves, and a 1974 Washington, D.C. jail escape attempt was moving along perfectly until one uninvited participant completely destroyed everything. 2 inmates had the rope ready, the timing set, and the window open. Then a third inmate, who had not been included in any part of the planning, attached himself to the rope at the absolute last second without telling anyone or asking permission. The combined weight of 3 grown men on one bedsheet rope snapped it immediately. One uninvited guest ended the entire operation in under 3 seconds. 37. Escaping through a drainage ditch during a California rainstorm in 1970 was genuinely creative thinking, using the weather and chaos of a storm to cover movement and mask sound from the guard towers above. The inmate got into the ditch, moved through the water, and followed it confidently toward what he believed was freedom waiting on the other side of the prison perimeter. The ditch did not go outside the perimeter. It ran directly into the facility's own enclosed water reclamation ponds, completely surrounded by fencing. He crawled through dirty water for 20 minutes and arrived back inside his own prison. 38. Brandon Moody escaped a Georgia prison in 2009 using one of the most unexpectedly creative hiding spots in modern escape history, concealing himself inside a large, hollow wooden horse prop from the prison's own theater program as it was being moved. He stayed completely still, stayed completely quiet, and waited. 3 days passed. Nobody found him. Nobody searched the prop. Then the drama class arrived for their scheduled rehearsal, unlocked the storage area, wheeled the horse into position, and found Brandon Moody still sitting inside it when they opened the prop up to prepare it for the upcoming performance. 3 days hiding, discovered by theater kids. 39. Kenneth Conley's 2007 escape from a Florida facility was genuinely the luckiest timing in escape history because he had absolutely nothing to do with creating the opportunity himself. A completely real fire alarm went off. Evacuation procedures began, and Conley simply walked out with the crowd during the chaos of a legitimate emergency drill. His luck ended the moment attendance was taken at the mandatory muster point outside. He had been marked present on the roster before the alarm. His absence from the muster line was flagged within minutes, and the search began before the alarm had even stopped ringing. 40. Jonathan Juarez walking away from a California work release site in 2018 was not exactly a sophisticated escape operation involving tunnels or disguises or months of careful planning. He simply walked away during a work shift and kept going. What ended his freedom 4 hours later was a conversation he had with his own work supervisor before leaving. Juarez casually told the supervisor he was heading out early that afternoon. The supervisor, apparently not processing the full implications of that statement, filed a standard absence report. That report triggered an alert. Officers went directly to his known locations, and Juarez was found almost immediately. 41. Hiding under a bridge for 6 full hours while hundreds of officers searched every road and tree line around you is genuinely impressive survival instinct under extreme pressure. This California inmate did exactly that in 1971 and was never found during the entire manhunt. He stayed perfectly still, perfectly quiet, and outlasted every search team sent after him. Then, 2 days later, he walked into a bus station and bought a ticket to the exact city where his family lived, using his own real name at the counter. 6 hours of perfect hiding followed by the most predictable bus ticket in history. 42. Roy Gardner spent years as one of California's most wanted criminals, robbing mail trains with enough skill and consistency to earn himself the nickname the Mail Bandit across newspapers nationwide. He escaped a California facility and managed to stay free for several months, which was respectable. During those months, however, Gardner was simultaneously writing and actively selling his own escape memoir to a publisher, while still a fugitive on the run. The publisher needed an address for royalty payments. Gardner provided his real home address without hesitation. Investigators found the address in the publisher's records and knocked on his door shortly after. 43. Helicopter prison escapes are rare enough to be genuinely shocking when they happen. A helicopter prison escape where the pilot files a completely standard traceable flight plan beforehand is something else entirely. In 2012, a Montreal jail rooftop pickup went exactly as planned, with the helicopter arriving on schedule and lifting the inmate cleanly off the roof without interference. Then, investigators started working the case and found a fully filed flight plan sitting in the Aviation Authority database detailing the exact route, the exact time, and the exact destination, the most dramatic escape method available, and the pilot treated it like a routine charter booking. 44. Oklahoma inmates planning a prison escape generally understand that the moment the escape is discovered, a radio broadcast goes out immediately describing them to every officer and civilian in the surrounding area. This particular inmate in 2017 escaped through a broken transport vehicle window and hid behind a gas station 1 mile away, which was not a bad starting position. The police radio broadcast, however, used his full name clearly and repeatedly. A civilian nearby was listening to a scanner, heard the name, looked up from their phone, saw the man standing behind the gas station, and called it in immediately. 45. Shipping crates have been used as hiding spots in escape attempts throughout prison history, but the laws of physics have consistently been the biggest obstacle for anyone attempting this particular method. 3 Kansas inmates in 1946 climbed inside a large industrial wooden shipping crate and waited to be loaded onto a transport vehicle heading outside the facility. The manifest listed the crate contents at 200 pounds. When the actual crate hit the loading dock scale, it registered 347 pounds. The dock workers stared at that number, did not need a calculator, and called security before the crate moved another inch. 46. Harry Houdini built his entire legendary career on escaping from handcuffs, locked boxes, water tanks, and prison cells in front of enormous paying audiences who genuinely believed he could escape from anything anywhere. In 1903, Houdini visited a Kansas jail specifically to publicly demonstrate his famous abilities to local officials and press. He stepped inside a cell to begin his performance and discovered the internal locking mechanism was broken in a way that made it impossible to open from the inside under any circumstances. The greatest escape artist in human history had to wait for the embarrassed sheriff to find the spare key. 47. Michael Elliott escaped an Alabama facility in 2014 by hiding in a contractor's truck, which was a solid enough plan that required decent timing and patience to execute properly. The plan, however, had one catastrophic structural weakness that Elliott had built into it himself before the escape ever happened. He had described the entire plan in specific detail to 3 different cellmates in the days leading up to it. 2 of those 3 cellmates reported the plan to guards in exchange for privileges before Elliott ever reached the parking lot. He was caught before clearing the facility grounds because he could not stop talking about his own escape. 48. The 1984 Maze prison escape in Northern Ireland required 38 prisoners to move through a heavily secured facility and reach the outside world without triggering an immediate lockdown. The operation needed a vehicle inside the gates at exactly the right moment, which the prisoners had not fully arranged. A civilian food delivery driver happened to be inside making his normal scheduled delivery at precisely the moment the escape began. That driver had absolutely no idea what was happening around him, or that he was about to become the involuntary getaway vehicle for the largest prison break in British history. He just wanted to finish his route. 49. Marion Federal Penitentiary in Illinois was considered one of the most technologically sophisticated and escape-resistant facilities in the entire American federal prison system during the 1980s, and 6 inmates in 1983 decided to test that reputation through a utility tunnel they had been carefully excavating for months. The tunnel itself was genuinely impressive work. What they had no knowledge of was a pressure sensor system installed in the tunnel floor just 2 weeks before their escape attempt. Every single step they took through that tunnel was silently logged and transmitted to the control room in real time. They were being tracked from their very first step. 50. Swimming from Alcatraz to the San Francisco shore through freezing bay water is something experts have consistently described as nearly impossible for any human being, regardless of fitness level or swimming ability. John Paul Scott disagreed with that assessment in 1960 and proved the experts partially wrong by actually completing the swim and becoming the only person ever confirmed to have reached the mainland from Alcatraz alive. He dragged himself onto the rocks below Fort Point completely exhausted and hypothermic, which is where a group of teenagers found him collapsed and immediately called the police. He made it across the bay and got turned in by kids. 51. Philip Sessoms escaped a North Carolina jail in 2010 by climbing inside a laundry bag and waiting to be carried out of the facility by the laundry service driver, which was a patient and genuinely clever approach to an otherwise impossible situation. The bag made it out of the building, got loaded into the driver's vehicle, and everything was moving perfectly toward freedom. Then the bag started visibly moving and audibly breathing on the road outside. The driver noticed, pulled over immediately, stared at the breathing laundry bag for a moment, and called 911 before driving another single inch toward the destination. 52. Rappelling from a prison roof on a bedsheet rope requires 2 things above everything else, which are a rope long enough to reach the ground and an anchor point strong enough to hold a grown man's full body weight under pressure. 2 Florida Detention Center inmates in 2016 had the first thing handled perfectly. Their rope was exactly the right length. The anchor, however, was a light fixture mounted in aging concrete that pulled completely clean out of the wall the moment the second man put his full weight on it. 1 fixture, 2 men, 0 successful escapes, and a very long drop. 53. Arkansas inmates attempting creative escapes have produced some memorable moments in American prison history, but 2005 delivered something that genuinely stands alone in the category of plans that should have had one more thinking step before execution. One inmate decided to stow away inside an industrial trash compactor to ride out of the facility hidden inside the waste load. He chose the wrong day. The compactor ran its full cycle with him inside. He survived the compression with serious injuries and was discovered by workers at the processing facility still inside the compacted waste load, conscious and apparently ready to explain his entire decision-making process. 54. Roy Gardner escaping a prison transport train in 1926 by slipping his handcuffs using soap. He had secretly palmed before boarding, was genuinely skillful preparation, and showed real criminal ingenuity under restrictive conditions. He got free, dropped from the moving train, and disappeared into the California countryside with every advantage available to a man who had just outsmarted federal transport security. 3 days of freedom followed. Then Gardner was caught attempting to rob another mail train in the exact same county he had just escaped from, targeting the same type of vehicle using the same approach. Same county, same train type, immediately recaptured. 55. Security camera installations at prison facilities are generally announced well in advance, budgeted through official channels, and completed during scheduled maintenance windows that inmates can sometimes track and anticipate. A Georgia inmate in 2019 had no reason to suspect anything had changed behind the gymnasium, where a section of perimeter fencing had always been a reliable blind spot for years. He cut through the fence exactly as planned and walked away cleanly. What he did not know was that a renovation completed just 3 weeks earlier had added exterior security cameras covering that exact section of fence in high resolution from multiple angles simultaneously. 56. Escaping a Texas prison facility in 1986 through an unsecured basement window and walking 4 miles to a bus station on foot showed genuine determination and reasonable planning instincts for someone working with limited resources. The inmate made it to the station without being stopped, found the right bus, and approached the driver ready to board. Then the money problem appeared. He had none. He asked the driver to let him ride for free, which drew immediate attention from everyone nearby, including a passenger who studied his face, studied his clothing, made a reasonable assessment of the overall situation, and called the police. 57. Federal fugitives who successfully disappear into ordinary American life for years generally understand that maintaining a completely clean legal profile is the single most important thing they can do to stay invisible indefinitely. A Texas fugitive managed 8 solid years of undetected civilian life before one completely routine transaction ended everything. He walked into a licensed firearms dealer in 1992 and filled out the standard federal paperwork for a legal gun purchase, which required fingerprints. Those fingerprints went into the database, matched an open federal warrant within seconds, and agents were at his location before he had even finished the purchase paperwork sitting on the counter. 58. Rideshare applications completely transformed everyday American transportation, and also, it turns out, completely transformed how quickly escaped inmates get caught in the modern era. A Tennessee inmate on a work detail in 2021 decided that walking or hitchhiking were unnecessarily complicated when a perfectly functional rideshare app was sitting on his phone. He opened the app, requested a pickup using his registered account attached to his real name and saved payment information, and waited at the curb. Police traced the account and the pickup location within 1 hour of the escape being reported. He ordered his own arrest like it was a delivery service. 59. David Sweat spent 11 days after the 2015 Dannemora escape moving carefully through upstate New York while one of the largest manhunts in state history searched for him across hundreds of square miles of forest and farmland. Helicopters flew grid patterns overhead. Tracking dogs worked every trail. Hundreds of officers rotated through search zones continuously. None of it caught him. What caught him was a single state trooper driving a rural road who spotted Sweat running across an open field 2 miles from the Canadian border, and simply got out of the car and ran him down on foot without any assistance whatsoever. 60. Charles Victor Thompson, escaping a Texas death row facility in 2005, required convincing a guard to hand over street clothes for a court hearing, which was already an audacious request that should have triggered immediate verification from anyone paying attention. The guard handed over the clothes. Thompson changed and walked out looking completely civilian. The problem sitting quietly in the background was that no court hearing had been scheduled for Thompson that day, under any circumstances whatsoever. It took staff several hours of going about their normal routines before someone connected those two facts together and realized what had just walked out the front door. 61. Belle Starr was one of the most notorious outlaws in the entire American West. A woman who had survived federal marshals, bounty hunters, and rival gangs for years without ever being betrayed by anyone in her circle. Her downfall came from inside her own family. Her son reported her hideout location to federal marshals and collected the reward money himself. She had trusted him as her primary lookout and eyes on the road. The person she relied on most to keep her safe was the one who sold her out completely. 62. Vance Franklin attempted a Texas County jail escape in 2009 that required no tools, no outside help, no tunnel, and no disguise whatsoever. He simply tried squeezing his entire body through the food service slot, cut into his cell door, which was an opening designed specifically for sliding meal trays and absolutely nothing else. His body made it through. His shoulders did not. He got completely stuck in the slot with half his body on each side and stayed that way until a guard doing morning rounds found him wedged there, still stuck, several hours later. 63. Jake Greasy. Thumb Guzik of the Capone organization was a man who understood how Chicago worked, who to pay, who to avoid, and how to move through the city without attracting unwanted attention. His 1930 escape attempt involved swapping clothes with a visitor inside the jail which was creative enough in theory. The visitor he swapped with was immediately arrested in the lobby for being a well-dressed man with absolutely no identification standing among a group of known Chicago mobsters. Guzik got the clothes swap done, and the visitor got arrested within 30 seconds of stepping away from the cell. 64. Stolen maintenance worker uniforms have helped dozens of inmates walk out of American prison facilities over the decades by exploiting the simple human tendency to trust someone who looks like they belong in a space. A 1985 Ohio inmate grabbed one of these uniforms and headed confidently for the exit, looking every bit the part of a legitimate worker. Every bit except one. The shirt was on completely inside out, with the facility name and department identification printed on the inside, now fully readable on the outside, as he walked past every staff member between his cell and the front gate. 65. Charles Victor Thompson demonstrated in 2006 that getting recaptured once and sent back to prison does not necessarily stop a determined person from immediately planning the next attempt. Thompson began passing written escape plans through his attorney visits using a coded system written carefully in the margins of legal notepads, an approach that required patience, creativity, and genuine attention to detail. A guard noticed the margin patterns during a routine document check, flagged the material, and investigators decoded the notes. Thompson had developed an entire communication system for planning his next escape, and a guard spotted it during an ordinary afternoon paper check. 66. Tom Horn was a legendary Wyoming range detective whose 1902 escape from Laramie County Jail required overpowering a guard during morning exercise, which he accomplished with enough force and speed to get himself outside the building and moving toward the street. Everything after that went immediately sideways in the most unlikely way imaginable. His own defense attorney happened to be walking toward the courthouse entrance at that exact moment, saw Horn running out of the jail, processed the situation in about 1 second, and physically tackled him to the ground on the public sidewalk before any officer arrived. 67. Stephen Whitsitt, slipping through a sally port behind a group of legitimately released inmates at a Kentucky facility, in 2010 was a clean and low-drama escape that required nothing more than timing, patience, and the ability to look like he belonged in that particular moving group of people. He cleared the facility without triggering a single alarm. Officers responding to the escape report did not launch an elaborate search operation or deploy tracking dogs across the county. They drove directly to his mother's house, which is standard first-check procedure for escaped inmates, knocked on the door, and found him there within 45 minutes. 68. George Jackson was one of the most politically significant prison figures in American history, a writer and activist whose case drew national attention and whose 1971 San Quentin escape attempt became one of the most disputed and analyzed events in California corrections history. Jackson attempted to escape by smuggling a pistol inside the facility, was shot and killed in the prison yard during the attempt, and the question of exactly how that weapon entered one of California's most secure facilities was never conclusively answered. The gun got in, the escape failed, and the entry point remained officially unresolved for decades afterward. 69. Construction dumpsters being hauled off work release sites are not typically considered high-priority tracking targets by law enforcement, which is exactly why a Louisiana inmate in 2022 decided one was his best available exit from the facility. He climbed in, stayed quiet, and felt the dumpster get lifted and loaded onto the hauling truck heading away from the prison. What he had not researched was the hauling company's fleet management system. Every dumpster on every truck carried a GPS tracker, and the transport coordinator shared the real-time location data with authorities within 20 minutes of the escape being reported. He was tracked the entire ride. 70. Christopher Boyce became famous as the Falcon in the Falcon and Snowman spy case, one of the most damaging espionage cases in Cold War American history. After escaping prison, he disappeared successfully for years, which suggested he had learned something from his previous experience with law enforcement. What he had not learned was how to adopt an entirely new criminal profile. Boyce began robbing banks across the Pacific Northwest using operational patterns so consistent and recognizable that FBI agents familiar with his prior criminal record identified his style, connected the robberies to the fugitive, and built a case that led directly back to him. 71. William Dodd escaped a Washington state facility in 1984 and successfully stayed hidden for several weeks, which required genuine discipline and careful movement to pull off without triggering the network of informants and surveillance that typically closes in on fugitives quickly. Then one financial matter pulled him back into his old neighborhood. A friend owed him money and Dodd wanted to collect it personally. That friend had already mentioned the debt to police during a completely separate investigation weeks earlier. Officers were waiting at the friend's address when Dodd showed up to collect. 72. Wisconsin prison bureaucracy in 1976 was apparently thorough enough to catch forged documents, but not quite sophisticated enough to make the process embarrassing for anyone except the inmate who tried it. One prisoner mailed himself a forged court summons, ordering his own release, which showed genuine creative ambition. He addressed it to the wrong court jurisdiction, however, and a processing clerk called the listed court to verify the document before acting on it. The court had never issued it. The clerk flagged it as fraudulent immediately, and the inmate never got within sight of the exit door. 73. Samuel Lopez hiding under a mattress inside a transport van at a New Mexico facility in 2008 was a reasonable enough hiding spot that had worked for other inmates at other facilities across the country in previous escape attempts. Lopez got himself positioned, stayed still, and waited for the van to clear the facility gates and put some distance between him and the prison. The problem was the snoring. Lopez fell asleep before the van moved and snored loudly enough for the driver to hear it clearly from the front seat, prompting an immediate stop and search before leaving the facility grounds. 74. Two Montana convicts spent months carefully widening a roof vent at their facility, working quietly and patiently through material that resisted every tool they could secretly obtain, doing everything correctly according to every prison escape principle they understood. The night they finally dropped through the vent and hit the ground outside their building, they felt the cold air of freedom for approximately 30 seconds. Then they saw the secondary electrified perimeter fence they had no knowledge existed, running in a complete unbroken loop around the entire facility exterior. Months of patient work delivered them into a second enclosure they could not climb. 75. Puerto Rico prison facilities in 2017 apparently had phone rooms where inmates could make calls under the pretense of legal consultations, a privilege designed to protect attorney-client communications and ensure inmates had access to proper legal representation throughout their cases. One inmate used this privilege to call his sister and arrange a vehicle pickup for an escape he was planning. He spoke freely and gave specific details about timing and location. Every outbound call from that room was automatically recorded and logged by the facility's own monitoring system. He planned his escape out loud on a recorded line without knowing it. 76. Broomstick vaulting over prison fencing is not a technique that appears frequently in escape literature, but a Texas inmate in 2006 apparently decided it was worth attempting and executed it with enough athletic ability to actually clear the fence cleanly on his first try. The landing, however, revealed a catastrophic planning error. He had selected a fence running along the interior of the warden's personal parking lot, rather than the exterior perimeter wall of the facility. He cleared the fence, dropped down, and landed directly in front of the warden's vehicle as it was pulling into the lot that morning. 77. Antonio Moresco escaped a New York facility in 1903 by blending into a group of legitimate visitors leaving after visitation hours ended, moving casually through the crowd and past the same guard he had walked by dozens of times before without ever drawing suspicion. The escape worked perfectly. 2 weeks of freedom followed. Then, Moresco returned to the same prison to visit a friend because apparently, the social calendar took priority over basic fugitive survival instincts. The same guard he had walked past on the way out recognized his face immediately at the entrance and arrested him before he reached the visitation room. 78. Robert Vick, hiding inside a state transport truck at an Arkansas facility in 2014 and riding out past the security checkpoint, showed solid timing and patience for someone working without any outside assistance or advanced preparation. The truck cleared the gates, hit the road, and covered 12 miles before the next problem appeared. Routine procedure required the truck to stop at a roadside weigh station, which it did. Vic's shifting position inside the truck bed while it sat on the scale created a weight distribution reading that triggered the station's overweight alert system. Officers searched the truck and found him immediately. 79. Food service carts moving through prison facilities carry meals to various buildings on the same grounds and occasionally to satellite locations nearby, which makes them an attractive escape option for inmates willing to fold themselves into a small, uncomfortable space and wait. A 1956 Ohio inmate climbed inside one such cart and stayed completely still through the entire loading and transport process. The cart was only traveling to the facility's own satellite administrative building, located on the same secured grounds as the prison itself. He stepped out of the cart into a lobby full of administrative staff who stared at him with considerable confusion. 80. Living undetected in rural Texas for nearly a decade while carrying an open federal warrant requires extraordinary discipline, careful identity management, and a complete commitment to staying invisible inside ordinary American civilian life. One federal fugitive managed all of that successfully for almost 10 full years before a single bureaucratic transaction ended everything in 1998. He walked into a Department of Motor Vehicles office and applied for a state driver's license using a false name, but submitted his own real fingerprints on the application form. Those fingerprints matched the open federal warrant in the database, and agents arrived at his address the same day. 81. Forging a court order, bearing the signature of a sitting judge, and handing it to a jail clerk in 2013 required genuine nerve and reasonably convincing paperwork skills from a Missouri prisoner who had clearly thought the plan through carefully. The forgery looked legitimate enough to pass an initial glance. Then it listed a city on the letterhead. The clerk processing the document happened to have grown up in that exact city and immediately noticed the spelling was wrong. One hometown connection between a clerk and a misspelled city name collapsed the entire operation instantly. 82. Timothy Leary escaping a California minimum security prison in 1971 by climbing telephone poles along the outer fence was not actually his own idea or his own plan in any meaningful way. The Weather Underground, a radical domestic organization, designed the escape, funded it, and executed the logistics from the outside, while Leary simply followed the route they had prepared for him. After the escape succeeded, they immediately issued a public press release proudly taking full credit for the entire operation. That press release helped the FBI build a significant case against the organization that they had essentially handed over themselves. 83. Processing a forged early release order convincingly enough that trained prison staff returned all personal belongings, printed a discharge receipt, and walked an inmate toward the exit door represents a genuinely impressive level of document forgery skill. A Virginia inmate accomplished exactly that in 2004 and was seconds away from walking out completely free. A computer cross-check running automatically in the background flagged a mismatched inmate ID number embedded in the paperwork. The alert appeared on a screen. A staff member looked up, looked at the inmate standing at the door, and stopped him before he reached the outside air. 84. Muriel Gardner, escaping a California women's facility in 1950 by convincing a guard she was a nurse, arriving from a neighboring hospital for a shift, showed quick thinking and confident delivery under pressure that most people would struggle to produce on the spot. The guard believed her completely, and she walked out without any problem. Her freedom lasted approximately one afternoon. She flagged down a police officer that same evening to ask for directions to the nearest bus station, apparently not registering that approaching uniformed law enforcement was perhaps not the ideal move for someone who had just escaped from prison hours earlier. 85. Coordinating a prison breakout through bribery requires absolute reliability from every person involved in the plan, particularly the person being paid to perform the single most critical task in the entire operation. A Texas inmate in 2009 paid a guard a specific amount of money to leave a specific door unlocked at a specific time, covering every logistical detail carefully. The guard accepted the payment, went about his shift, and forgot which door he had been paid to unlock. He unlocked a completely different door on a completely different corridor, leaving the actual escape route sealed and the entire plan sitting dead in the water. 86. Staying completely invisible as a federal fugitive for 8 consecutive years while living inside ordinary American society requires avoiding every system that could flag an open warrant, including courts, financial institutions, government databases, and law enforcement encounters of any kind. One fugitive managed all of that successfully until a workplace dispute pushed him toward a decision that ended everything. He He sued a former employer for unpaid wages in civil court using his real name. The defendant's attorney ran a standard background check on the plaintiff, found the open federal warrant attached to that name, and reported it immediately to authorities. 87. Fire drills at prison facilities create genuine chaos, moving large numbers of inmates and staff through corridors and out to muster points simultaneously, which makes them attractive cover for escape attempts by anyone paying attention to the patterns. Two Louisiana inmates in 1999 timed their escape to coincide perfectly with a legitimate fire drill and were moving cleanly toward the perimeter. One of them stopped. He turned around, went back to his cell, and grabbed his personal property bag before continuing toward the exit. Those 2 extra minutes were enough. The drill ended, guards returned to their posts, and both men were caught before clearing the building. 88. Rappelling down a braided cord from a second-floor prison window in Arizona in 2015 required the kind of physical preparation and material gathering that takes weeks of quiet work inside a facility where every unusual behavior gets noticed and reported. 2 inmates pulled it off and reached the window on schedule with their cord ready. The first man went down and landed cleanly on the ground below. The second man followed, reached the end of the cord 6 inches above the ground, dropped the remaining distance, and broke his ankle on impact. His cry of pain immediately alerted the guard positioned directly below the window. 89. Escaping through a laundry service and staying completely free for 11 months represents one of the longer successful evasion runs in Alabama prison history, requiring consistent discipline and careful avoidance of every system that could identify and locate a wanted fugitive. This inmate managed all of it successfully for nearly a full year before making one catastrophic decision. He wrote a letter directly to the judge who had sentenced him, requesting a reduced sentence on moral grounds and explaining his situation in detail. He included his current return address on the envelope. The letter was delivered to the judge and his address to law enforcement simultaneously. 90. Hospital escapes from guarded prison medical visits happen often enough that facilities have developed increasingly strict protocols around patient supervision during outside treatment. A North Carolina inmate in 2008 escaped from a hospital while under guard for a medical procedure and got far enough away to feel genuinely free for several hours. Then he called his girlfriend on a landline phone to let her know he was out. His girlfriend was already under active telephone monitoring by law enforcement as part of a completely separate criminal investigation that had nothing to do with him. Her monitored phone caught every word he said. 91. 3 German POWs, escaping an Arizona camp in 1945, had survived the entire European theater of World War II, crossed an ocean, and endured imprisonment in a foreign country, which suggested a baseline level of toughness and geographic awareness that should have served them reasonably well in the Arizona desert. It did not. None of the 3 men had any idea how far away the Mexican border actually was from their camp. They ran out of water after 2 days, found a rancher, begged for water, and surrendered to him immediately while he called the army. 92. Disabling a security camera before crawling through a utility shaft to escape a Mississippi prison in 2010 showed genuine technical awareness and reasonable preparation from 2 inmates who understood that visible movement on a monitor would end their attempt immediately. They disabled the camera successfully and moved into the shaft feeling confident. What they had not researched was the monitoring system itself. The camera feed interruption was automatically logged the moment it went dark and sent an instant alert directly to the control room. Disabling the camera did not hide the escape. It announced it. 93. Forged work release forms have successfully gotten inmates past prison processing desks across America for decades, exploiting the volume of paperwork that staff handle daily and the reasonable assumption that documents presented at official windows are legitimate. A California inmate in 1983 presented one such form confidently and waited for processing to begin. The form listed a sponsoring employer as required. The admissions clerk looked up the employer name as part of standard verification procedure and discovered the company had gone completely out of business 2 full years before the form was supposedly issued by them. 94. Pretty Boy Floyd successfully evaded every major law enforcement agency in Depression-era America for years by staying mobile, varying his locations, and never staying anywhere long enough to become a familiar face to the local population around him. Then he settled into a routine in rural Ohio that lasted long enough to become a problem. A local farmer whose property Floyd had been visiting regularly for 3 weeks to buy supplies recognized him from a wanted poster during a routine trip to the post office and called the county sheriff that same afternoon without any hesitation whatsoever. 95. Daniel Kahn, escaping a Virginia facility in 2011 and staying free for 5 full days, demonstrated enough basic survival instinct to avoid immediate recapture, which puts him ahead of a significant percentage of escaped inmates who are caught within hours of leaving. What happened on day 5, however, removed him from any conversation about successful fugitives permanently. Kahn walked back into the same facility he had escaped from through the staff entrance, apparently without a clear plan for what he intended to do once inside. A guard conducting a routine corridor sweep found him wandering through the building and arrested him on the spot. 96. Coal delivery chutes, running into prison facilities in the early 20th century, represented a genuine security vulnerability that administrators were generally aware of and attempted to monitor during active delivery periods. A Massachusetts inmate in 1926 identified this vulnerability, timed his exit to coincide with a morning coal shipment, and crawled through the chute while the delivery was in progress. He emerged outside the building covered in coal dust and immediately encountered the coal truck driver standing right there watching the entire thing happen. The driver walked directly to the guard booth at the front gate and reported it before driving away. 97. Florida prison transport operations in 2003 apparently included a pilot monitoring program that embedded tracking chips directly into the soles of prison-issued footwear, which was either a brilliant piece of forward-thinking security technology or an administrative detail that somebody forgot to communicate to the inmates wearing those shoes. 2 inmates escaped during a transport vehicle breakdown by slipping out of loosened restraints and running into the surrounding area feeling confident about their head start. Every step they took in those prison-issued shoes was being transmitted to a tracking system. They ran as fast as they could directly into a GPS signal. 98. Iowa fugitives who successfully disappear into civilian life generally understand that staying invisible means avoiding every official system that could cross-reference their identity against open warrant databases maintained by law enforcement agencies at every level of government. One Iowa inmate managed 3 solid years of undetected civilian life before a completely unrelated legal matter caught him. His probation officer from a previous conviction that had nothing to do with his current escape ran a routine compliance check, discovered the open escape warrant attached to his file, connected both cases together, and reported it to the relevant authorities the same day. 99. Escaping a Texas facility through a broken exterior window in 2014 and clearing the perimeter successfully put one inmate ahead of the majority of escape attempts that fail before anyone even reaches the outer wall. 30 minutes of freedom followed. Then hunger or thirst or simple bad judgment led him to a nearby convenience store where he attempted to use a credit card he had found inside his cell. The card had already been reported stolen before he ever picked it up. The transaction triggered an immediate fraud alert, and officers arrived at the store while he was still standing at the register. 100. Harvey Bailey, escaping the Kansas State Penitentiary during a mass prison break in 1932, put him on the street as one of the most wanted bank robbers in Depression-era America, with every reason to change his habits, his locations, and his recreational activities completely. He changed none of them. Bailey was a dedicated golfer who had played the same courses around the same areas for years before his imprisonment. A detective who knew his habits and hobbies simply identified his regular golf course, drove out there, and waited at the clubhouse. Bailey showed up for his usual round and was arrested on the fairway. 101. 2 Georgia inmates escaping a transport van in 2019 when a door latch failed were not exactly prepared for the outside world in any meaningful way, having no civilian clothes, no money, no contacts, and no vehicle waiting anywhere nearby. What made their situation immediately and spectacularly worse was the clothing they were wearing. Their prison-issued jumpsuits had their full last names stenciled across the back in 4-inch block letters. A passing motorist read both names clearly through a car window, called 911 immediately, and officers had confirmed identities before the inmates had traveled half a mile from the van. 102. Furniture delivery shipments leaving prison facilities represent a logical escape opportunity for anyone willing to fold themselves into a tight, uncomfortable space and endure a potentially lengthy ride to an unknown destination somewhere outside the perimeter. A California inmate in 1975 committed to exactly this approach, climbed inside an outgoing furniture shipment, and rode it out past every security checkpoint without triggering a single alarm. The delivery address was a state government administrative facility located on the same secured campus as the prison itself. He climbed out of the furniture inside a state office building, surrounded by government employees who had not ordered a person. 103. Planning a mass tunnel escape from behind a Texas prison gymnasium requires significant coordination among a trusted group of inmates who all understand that secrecy is the single most important element keeping the entire operation alive. This group of Texas inmates in 2017 had the tunnel started and moving in the right direction when their operation was destroyed by someone who had nothing to do with it. Another inmate discovered the tunnel entrance independently, assumed it was abandoned contraband storage left by someone else, and reported it to a guard specifically to earn good behavior credits. The tunnel was found before it went anywhere useful. 104. Forged prison transfer paperwork moving an inmate from a higher security facility to a lower security. One requires convincing documentation, matching identification numbers, and a receiving facility that actually exists and can be contacted for verification if anyone decides to check. A Louisiana inmate in 2006 handled the documentation convincingly enough, but selected a receiving facility that had been closed down and converted into a community college 3 full years before he submitted the paperwork. The processing officer picked up the phone to verify the destination, discovered it was now an educational institution, and flagged the transfer request as fraudulent without further deliberation. 105. Alvin Creepy. Karpis held the distinction of being the last original public enemy still actively operating in America during the 1930s, which meant J. Edgar Hoover considered his capture a personal and institutional priority above almost everything else on the FBI agenda at that time. Karpis was not caught through sophisticated surveillance operations or confidential informant networks despite all the resources dedicated to finding him. A neighbor in New Orleans noticed an unfamiliar man loitering outside an apartment building for several consecutive days, found the behavior suspicious enough to report it, and the resulting check of the address led agents directly to Karpis. 106. GPS fleet tracking systems installed on contractor vehicles operating around prison facilities exist precisely because contractors represent one of the most consistently exploited security vulnerabilities in the entire American corrections system, providing regular legitimate access to people and vehicles that are difficult to search thoroughly every single time. A Maryland inmate escaped a work detail in 2008 by hiding inside a contractor's truck feeling confident about the head start the ride would provide. The contractor's company tracked every vehicle in their fleet in real time and shared the truck's live location with authorities within 20 minutes of the escape being reported. 107. Prison theatrical performances create genuine scheduling complexity for correctional staff who must account for inmate locations across multiple rehearsal spaces, costume storage areas, and performance venues simultaneously, which makes them attractive cover for escape attempts by anyone clever enough to exploit the confusion. A Pennsylvania inmate in 1969 used exactly this cover to hide his absence during a performance, believing the theatrical chaos would mask his disappearance long enough to create a meaningful head start. A second inmate who was completely uninvolved in the plan helpfully told a passing guard that his friend would definitely be back after the show finished. 108. 8 months of patient tunnel digging inside a Nevada prison facility represents an extraordinary commitment of time, physical effort, and secrecy from an inmate who had clearly decided that this particular escape method was worth every risk involved in executing it over such a long period. The tunnel was genuinely impressive in its construction and length. It emerged in completely the wrong location because the inmate had been navigating the entire dig using a hand-drawn map, oriented in the wrong compass direction from the very beginning. 8 months of digging in the wrong direction delivered him into the prison's own maintenance storage yard. 109. Bribery-based escape plans require absolute confidentiality among everyone involved, which means the number of people who know about the plan should be kept as small as physically possible under any circumstances. A Texas inmate in 2001 paid a laundry worker to smuggle him out in a linen cart, which involved exactly 2 people knowing the plan, which was already 1 person more than ideal. The laundry worker then told 2 additional inmates about the arrangement because apparently the secret was too good to keep. Both of those inmates reported it to guards independently without knowing the other had already done exactly the same thing. 110. Walking away from a low-security Florida facility during outdoor recreation time in 2016 without triggering any immediate alarm is the kind of clean, low-drama exit that most inmates attempting elaborate tunnel escapes or disguise operations would genuinely envy for its simplicity. 3 hours of freedom followed before one transportation decision ended everything permanently. He went to a nearby commercial airport and attempted to board a scheduled flight without any identification documents whatsoever. TSA agents flagged him at the checkpoint, ran his information, found the active escape warrant attached to his name, and had him in custody before any plane left the gate. 111. Industrial cardboard ballers processing recycling shipments at prison facilities are large, loud, and powerful enough that hiding inside one represents perhaps the single most dangerous escape method ever seriously attempted by any inmate in recorded American corrections history. An Alabama inmate attempted exactly this in 1994, climbing inside the baler as it prepared an outgoing recycling shipment. The machine ran its full compression cycle with him inside. He survived with significant injuries, rode the compressed bale to the recycling facility, and was discovered by workers still inside the cardboard, conscious, and apparently lucid enough to explain in considerable detail exactly how he had gotten there. And that is 111 of the dumbest, most ridiculous, most embarrassing prison escape mistakes in human history. These people had one job, one single job, and somehow a birthday cake, a snoring laundry bag, a Waffle House breakfast, and a Facebook live stream were enough to bring them all down. If this video made you feel just a little bit smarter than a professional criminal today, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to Dumb History for more gloriously terrible decision-making from throughout history. And drop a comment below telling us which escape was the absolute dumbest. We already have our answer, but we want yours.